Welcome to those just getting into the room. My name is Mike. We'll be starting shortly after 12 o'clock. This is the virtual art talk presented by the Heard Museum, uh, featuring Marcus Dunn and moderated by Olivia Barney. Like I said, just a couple minutes after 12, we'll get started just to let some folks into the room with us. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, welcome everyone who is attending the virtual art talk hosted by the Heard Museum. We're here talking with Marcus Dunn today. Just after 12 o'clock, we will begin. I wanted to let some time pass to let everyone into the room. So about 12:03, we'll get started with our virtual art talk. Thank you. Welcome to those just joining us. We're going to wait just a couple minutes more to allow folks to come into the room and get their video set up. We will get started around 12:03, 12:04 for the virtual art talk featuring Marcus Dunn and Olivia Barney. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone in attendance. Maybe good morning to some of us in different time zones. My name is Mike Webb. I am the Public Engagement Manager here at the Heard Museum, and I am very, very excited to be here for today's virtual art talk. We have such wonderful content to share with you and such wonderful guests to hear from. So let me get started with my little spiel, and we will get into our talk very, very shortly. So this is a continuing series of our virtual art talks. We plan to have a virtual art talk every month. So please look out for those on our event page on herd.org whenever possible. It's our great pleasure today to welcome our panelists, the Heard Museum's Olivia Barney and honored guest artist, Marcus Dunn. As always, if you enjoy learning about this exhibition and the museum's collection, I encourage you to visit the Heard Museum's Billie Jane Bagley Library and Archives. The library is free and open to the public Monday through Friday, and it's a fantastic place to learn more about the artists and the works represented in the museum's collection. Also, virtual art talks are possible thanks to the support we receive from our Heard Museum members. Members get many special and exclusive benefits, including free museum admission every day, a 10% discount in the museum shops and cafe. The shop right now is being remodeled, so October 2024 is when you can come and check out our new shop and be able to get some really nice jewelry and other items there. You also get discounted event tickets and early admission to signature events like the World Championship Hoop Dance Contest and the Heard Museum Guild Indian Fair and Market. So please consider joining as a member today. You can purchase your membership online, on site, or if you give us a call. And before I introduce our program and moderator, I just wanted to do a few housekeeping notes for our viewers. If you're familiar with Zoom, maybe this webinar is a little bit different format. So today's presentation is a webinar. And so you'll only see the screens of our presenters, which is Marcus and Olivia. You will be able to ask questions. If you'd like to propose a question for a panel, please write your question in the chat box or in the Q&A. And those features are when you scroll over your screen, you'll see a little black box pop up, part of Zoom, and you'll see down at the bottom and towards the middle, chat and Q&A. You can use either of those features to chime in and ask a question. We will field questions at the end of the webinar. And make sure to answer as many as possible within the time we have. Captions are available. If you'd like to use them, again, scroll over your screen and turn them on with the menu button. You'll see, let me see if I can help you here. You'll be able to see a letter C to be able to activate those closed captions. Okay, so I think my job is done here. With that, it's my pleasure to pass things off to our moderator, Olivia Barney. Olivia?
Hi, Thank you, Mike. Just to introduce myself to everybody here, I'm Olivia Barney. I'm the collections coordinator here at the Herd. I'm also part of the curatorial team and curate select exhibits here at the museum. I'm not the curator for Away at Home that's on the screen, but I will explain why we have that there. I want to give kind of brief synopsis of what we'll be talking about, as well as our artist that we have here today, Marcus Dunn. For this August presentation of Virtual Art Talks, we're centering the conversation around the United States American Indian boarding schools, and also the efforts of artists like Marcus Dunn, who aim to explore the narratives of the attendees who were affected by the government's system of assimilation, which was through these forced attendance and education of vulnerable Indigenous youth at these schools. Overall, I wanted to talk about also that why we are doing this art talk and how it ties into the rest of the month, which we're going into September. This September, the Herd Museum is dedicating our First Friday programming to creating intentional space to approach this period in American history through a practice of healing and reclamation, and also will artists like Marcus Dunn and as well as others that will be incorporating out throughout the month, what they are doing to recognize this period of history. We're also on September 30th, we are recognizing Orange Shirt Day, which is the National Day of Remembrance for U.S. Indian boarding schools. And then I also wanted to speak more about what we see on the screen, Away from Home. So for 24 years now, the Herd Museum has presented an exhibition on the United States boarding schools, currently titled Away from Home. It examines the sometimes unknown but critical to acknowledge period of history where institutions that were called boarding schools operated by the United States government aimed to forcibly assimilate American Indian children into civilized society, quote unquote. It is a story that must be continued to be shared and one that is central to remembering our nation's past, but also continuing to the present and how it affects it now. Now going into our speaker, I want to introduce Marcus Dunn, who's also on the screen with me. Marcus Dunn has exhibited his work at the Florence County Museum in South Carolina, the SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah, Georgia, and the Institute of American Indian Arts Museum of Contemporary Native American Arts in Santa Fe. He is a 2022 South Arts Southern Prize recipient for North Carolina. His work consists of small and large-scale paintings concerning memory and cultural identity. His heritage is Tuscarora and non-native descent. He is currently living and working in Laurinburg, North Carolina, and he is alumni of Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Prior to earning a Master's of Fine Arts in Painting from the Savannah College of Art and Design, he earned his B.F.A. in Studio Art from the Institute of American Indian Arts. So thank you for joining us, Marcus. We want to get into talking about your work and further introduce yourself.
Thank you. Try Nerarguast, Marcus Giate, Eruk Gehatne, Giate, Skarure, Diva Gafnutne, Guarine, Gisasette. So, good afternoon. My name is Marcus Dunn. I'm Tuscarora from North Carolina, and I'm Wolf Clan. And thank you guys for having me. I've been making work about this particular content, this subject matter for quite a while, for past 8 years or so. And it's great to finally, be able to share a little bit about what I've been doing with the Herd Museum and with more of a Indigenous group of individuals that oftentimes I'm showcasing with places that haven't really known or investigated this theme much. So it's great to finally be able to share it with the Herd, which is an Indigenous run institution.
Great. Well, I kind of want to introduce our audience too, and to how we even know each other. We actually are both alumni of the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is where I met you, Marcus. And I remember seeing your work at one of I think it was probably like your thesis show, and I recognized clearly the different images that were from boarding school archival photography. So I kind of wanted to start off by asking you, like, how did you get into that? How did you choose? Like, how did you want that to be the focus of some of your collections of work?
Yeah, it all started when I was in grad school.
Mhm.
Was looking for looking for something to latch on to. I've always been someone who liked drawing and didn't really start painting until I was a student at Institute of American Indian Arts. Got interested in that, um, and then I've always wanted to do figurative work. Did a lot of portraits. Started doing some landscapes. Didn't really know what direction I wanted to go. Never really knew how to really tie anything cultural, or even if I was ever going to approach anything like that, as far as like specifically with Indigenous themed content. And so, but I guess it was around that time, 2016 or 15 or so, I was just like constantly looking at so many archive photographs. And I think there was just many more of them just circulating online.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the more I looked at those photographs of people from different schools, the more I kind of felt like I understood them, or I felt like I knew them in some way. And it was just something that I felt like I wanted to reimagine how I could share their story through paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used photo references, resources throughout ever since I started painting, and it was never really anything that really like felt like it had the type of importance that these images had,
Mm-hmm.
at least to me. So um, for me, it was a shoe into tapping into memory, but also into themes that I felt like were very important to address in my own identity as a Native person, with assimilation and how that's been a part of everyone's history.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone can relate to that, whether they're Native or non-Native, in some fashion, of how that kind of plays a role into their life, as well as as well as uh, as well as just kind of finding ways to kind of use the material of paint as a way to kind of as a storytelling um, device that stretches a little bit further away from what uh, photography simply does. I think it adds a little bit more to. Um, it's kind of a supplement in a way to
Mm-hmm.
what photography offers. So I wanted to go about my work in that way, and see where it would go after that. And it's kind of evolved a little bit over time, but kind of always stayed true to like the essence of what I've always been trying to share with it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, especially when we talk about your comment there hit me a lot, where we're talking about how assimilation and that history of it affects all of us, not just Indigenous Americans. It's all cultures kind of have that history of recognizing it. So I think that was very key that like how you brought that up. I also wanted to ask about, I know that some of these selection of photographs that when you were using photographs as reference material, they're from the Library of Congress. Did you look elsewhere, or is it mainly Library of Congress that you looked at for these photographs?
Yeah, Library of Congress is where
Mm-hmm.
I guess you find majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
Those are usually within the United States, but I've also found images. I think I have one sourced from Canada, from
Mm-hmm.
the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation, I think in Quebec, or right around that area. Uh, so I just looking through as many archives photos
Mm-hmm.
that I could
Yeah.
possibly find, whether it's in U.S. boarding schools or Canadian residential schools,
Mm-hmm.
whatever I can see that kind of shares that history, and
Mm-hmm.
dating back to whether it's from the 1800s or 1900s.
Yeah. Thank you. And then I kind of want to go on to what we're sharing on the screen with the viewers too. So right now we just went through two of them that showed a photograph of youth that were attending the schools, but also the painting that you created with them. May I ask you more about the paintings, and also like why you just decided to show them in such a manner? Like focus on each of their faces rather than just one collective painting.
Sure, yeah.
Hmm.
I wanted to do it as a series,
Hmm.
just kind of separate each one of them,
Hmm.
see what, because yeah, it's a group shot, but each one of them, even though they're grouped as a collective, each one
Hmm.
of them had, lived their own individual life. Each one of them experienced feelings of loneliness or displacement while they were at this attending the schools,
Hmm.
and that was just another way of kind of tying those emotions into it, and as well as uh, singularly, spacing them out in a way. Even though this arrangement was something that was collaborated by a curator, figuring that placement out, but um, I wanted to I wanted to kind of express that through this this series, but
Hmm.
also making sure that they were still together in a sense,
Yeah.
creating that sense of togetherness, like you see in the photographs, because they're all show you know linked together with their own cultural similarity coming from
Hmm.
I believe the Chiricahua Apaches, and but also showing that individuality that they all had unique experiences, whether they experienced things that were obviously traumatic experiences at the schools and things like that,
Hmm.
but also um, their own individual interests. They're all individual people, and I wanted to
Yeah.
express them as that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Mike, if we could move to the next slide. So yeah, I really like the comment you made about the individuals and stuff too, because as we are a group and stuff, and it's also when we're grouping in photography, I think that's very important what you're saying, but that we're all individuals, whether it's our own tribal nations, but also just as people, as you're saying, interests, who they are, who their families are. I really liked how you focused on them. So you could still tell that it was a group photo, but also that these people have their own thoughts and their own ideas and experience of what they're going through with these boarding schools. But even outside of that experience of trauma or trying to recover, it's like, they're their own people too. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I want to kind of ask about these next one when I was looking at the motorboat photo that you referenced, and then also the painting that went with it that you created was the reason you chose, so we saw the kind of group class photo before and their uniforms, but when we look at something like this, was there a reason you chose this photo?
Yeah, obviously the clothing's different,
Mm-hmm.
but it's that's going to be something that obviously that definitely transitions
Mm-hmm.
over time, whether they're students at Carlisle, which those
Mm-hmm.
were, or any other residential school or in boarding school, is that um, whether they were wearing militaristic style uniforms to contemporary clothing that were fashionable of the day.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that just evolves over the time, through the whole span of time while the boarding schools were around. So I want to approach that, but also this is a very different scene. I wanted something or it's a very different type of painting. This is more this more reflects a lot of my interest in combining landscapes with figures and creating
Mm-hmm.
something that's a little bit more like narrative storytelling in the paintings. Something I love to do, and also approaching the way I'm painting differently, which is obvious in the way that the figures are depicted. Some of them, like the ones that are actually standing in the boat,
Mm-hmm.
are a little bit further. I won't want to say further along, but fully fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
Actually having local color in their faces, but the other ones
Mm-hmm.
they're standing outside the boat, almost having a ghost-like appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to show somewhat of a transition between stepping into the boat, while also linking this to it's a legitimate memory of what had taken place during the time,
Mm-hmm.
while um, sending some of these children across the waters,
Mm-hmm.
or across into another territory of of what this image kind of like feels to me. And this is a very large scale painting compared to those other ones. They were very small portraits, and
Mhm.
so which you can definitely see in the next slide
Yeah.
there when it was
The large
showing
scale
them.
of it. Mhm.
Yeah, that was one of the focal paintings from my thesis exhibition at SCAD. So
Mhm.
um, had a
And
lot
that,
of responses to that one for
mhm.
sure.
And the one that you had at SCAD, that was titled Other Youth, if I remember correctly?
That was the 2019
Mhm.
when I came back and did
When you
a
came back.
small show at the museum
Mhm.
there, the SCAD Museum.
Yeah, and then your collection as well from their thesis. So that was a really great point that you brought up. I never knew that about your work with the perspectives and the change in renderings and also the layers of paint. Do you do that often with your work too? Like how you're talking about how like some have more of a kind of look or appearance, and then the others are maybe have more oranges in the faces. Is that
It was
something
something
you
I
do
did
often? Yeah.
It
Mhm.
was something I did with that one particularly.
Yeah.
I may have done that in a few others. I just felt like it fit for that image. It was just
Mhm.
something that felt right. Once I build up those figures, I kind of left them. And it's something I do, and this is talking a little bit about my practice, is that I build up little by little. I do work in a lot of layers on
Mhm.
top of one another, but I also I also like to approach each painting differently. While they still have my hand at work in there, it's
Mhm.
obvious when you look from painting to painting, like it has a similar technique, similar approach with the brushwork and all of that. But I want them all to kind of fit. I want the painting and the way I approach the painting to fit with the images that I make. And this one just kind of clicked when I started to add more to those figures in the boat, and I
Mhm.
saw that the other three were a little less resolved, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
It just felt like I should kind of leave them where they are.
Hey, that's great. Yeah, it's great to hear the thought behind like why you decide to leave the painting as is or add more detail. I think it's very insightful to our audience too, and as well as me. Mike, can you go to the next slide? And I guess I kind of want to talk a little more about, I guess, a mixture of the practice, but how it ties into the boarding schools too. You talked earlier about painting, painting being your method, kind of versus photography, and how you are able to story tell throughout that. Is there a certain like way you paint or the translucent layers that you use that you try to render it in a certain way that tells a story?
Yeah, that's again that takes me back into
Mm-hmm.
like what am I thinking when I'm in the studio?
Mm-hmm.
uh, yes, it does. Uh, a lot of it is the physicality of the paint. What
Mm-hmm.
does paint allow for me to do with um, with creating with creating um, spatial differences between not only like what's obvious between like if you're looking at an interior scene like this or an
Mm-hmm.
exterior scene, the spatial differences between the depth from foreground, midground, and background. Getting technical here, um, but also like with what how the paint reacts on the
Mm-hmm.
surface. I'm really drawn to movement and through the brushwork, the energy that it employs to not only the surface but also to the psyche. When we see it, we
Mm-hmm.
register it as something that is constant, is ever changing, and is constantly flowing. It also can be very fleeting. So I always find myself uh, latching on to certain areas in a painting, whether it's like you might have some, you might push some paint around and
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't fully blend into to another area.
Mm-hmm.
I like when that happens, and I like to show the hand at work. I think that helps. Uh, it helps the viewer, at least when they see mine. It doesn't mean that every painting has to have that. I see many artists who don't have that, and they're really blended. So so pristinely and so evenly that it's almost magic that it even happened in the first place. But I like people to actually, when they
see it and feel it.
yeah, they see my work and they can kind of like dive right into like, oh, how did how he handled this? I can get a sense of like what he might have been feeling at the time, what his decisions were to kind of just leave this and go to another part of the painting. And I think that translates into the content, the subject matter too, in some way.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I guess going from how you're using that as your storytelling medium to the specific piece that's on the screen, Media Room, what were you trying to do with this piece? I also know from you sharing with me that some of your work was based on photographs, but then later you didn't use so many photographs too, and that you kind of made narratives from your research. Was this one based on a photograph, or was that one of the ones that wasn't?
It had elements of a photograph, like an actual space, but also not. There was a lot of things like I believe, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the actual records that they're holding. And this is going back, a few years back to try to remember, but I'm pretty sure they were different, or at least very different than how they were shown in the photograph. I did bring in a lot of things that were like not actually there, not actually present, to kind of just design the space how I wanted it to. I would kind of place myself in like a set designer's chair in a way, and that's kind of like, I love to have various roles like that, like almost like I'm directing a film, or like setting up the stage for a scene or for a play. That's kind of how I like to approach these, and so I was approaching it that way. Also, color choices were very, very different than what I had originally had in the photo source. The what else? Just the approach to how I'm incorporating like shadows and highlights and all that kind of stuff to help bring emphasis to certain areas. Those are all just like ways that I like to dictate the overall composition a little bit further.
Thank you.
But this one was definitely one that I had a little bit more room to kind of experiment with, for sure, than some of the other ones.
Yeah. Can we go to the next slide? So this shows like a collection of even more of those works. So the ones we just talked about, the Media Room, and then as well as a bunch of others. So can you tell me more about these other paintings that are in the photo? For which show this is from, as far as like your collections of works that focus on these?
Yeah, this was from a 2019 show. This was titled Other Youth at SCAD Museum. And so it was a show that I had that year, and several new pieces. Quite almost all of them were brand new for that show. It was right after I had attended Vermont Studio Center in 2018. I had started to incorporate a little bit more. I guess I started to expand the color palette a little bit more, expand like what direction I was going with, using a little bit more out of my imagination into the works, as opposed to just strictly everything that's dead set being shown through the photographs. And by the way, I'm using mostly, and very rarely do I use color photos. They're mostly black and white. So everything from color to technique that's used is all like coming straight from me, and like how I want to express these images in paintings. And so yeah, this was a body of work that just like I was in a great momentum in leaving from Vermont Studio Center. It was a great experience from the residency. It had me get back into the groove, and I was able to crank out a lot of new stuff
Yeah.
at that period.
And is there a reason for this body of work that you called it Other Youth? Like, is there a meaning behind that title for you and why you titled this collection of work that?
Yeah, I always hear a lot of people that they want to tell something that fits within their story or their identity of their cultures to because they want to see more of that in spaces and in galleries and museums. And obviously people that are not of the majority of the minority oftentimes called other. So
Mm,
I use that as a word just to kind of refer to that.
hmm
Other youth being also other, meaning maybe less than. So, uh, you know, placing that as a way to kind of like take take ownership of that word and
hmm
use it to kind of describe oneself.
Yeah. I like that when you say reclaiming it and, putting your own spin on it and showing how maybe you've perceived these and also the paintings and such you've made from them too. So thank you for sharing that. Mike, can you go to the next slide? So would you mind talking about this work a lot? Because I've seen we have switched the scenes. So we had like the classroom, we had the grouping, we had the people getting on the boat going back home, and then we had the media room, and you talked about kind of like going from these photographs to just referencing them a little bit. Can you talk about this one maybe and what inspired this?
Yeah, so like I think I've always kept going back to the archives and really seeing like images that like inspire me to make some new paintings. Of course, classroom scenes are going to be an obvious thing, but I had never really had that in my paintings. I didn't really want to just take one from a specific classroom scene from a school. I could have easily done that, but I wanted to do something that like kind of stretched it a little bit, also stretched my imagination a little bit how I was approaching it. So I used for this particular painting, I referred to I don't have it. I don't have it in this slideshow, but
Hmm
I referred from a screenshot from a film, a coming of age film that I really like called "Welcome to the Dollhouse" from the '90s, and so I like took that and then I changed the characters, changed the figures. I used some other photo references from boarding school archives to kind of use them as models for the students and just kind of like flip the script and made it about, you know, change made the scene about them as opposed
hmm
to like painting the girl from the
hmm
film sitting in class.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just another way for me to like take something and that which many artists have done throughout art history. They've painted other artists' works or other artists' paintings and made new or different versions of it. And so I kind of did the same thing here.
hmm
And um, yeah, title it "Raise Your Hand." Obviously, that's a command, which
hmm
many different commands in English specifically, refusing any of the students to speak their native tongue was like, just felt like it fit for this particular piece.
Definitely, and that's even why I wonder thoughts behind it too, is like when I saw that raise your hand, I definitely see and understand the sentiment you just shared when it's like that's a command. And often like how classrooms or in this way, the assimilation of Native students with boarding schools, like that command rather than share your thoughts or more of a community aspect of communication. It's much more of a commanding tone of voice. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Mike, do you want to go to the next one? Yeah. And then fixing his tie. So I know we focused on this one, at least with our image and stuff too. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, and this
Mm-hmm.
one didn't come from a. This one actually didn't come from a archive photo at all. I just like I wanted to do something that felt like you know, I've grown up putting ties on my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I wanted to do something that felt a little bit more from me and not necessarily more of a self portrait in a way, and that's what this felt like. Even though it was obviously to share experiences that other boarding school students had experienced. Neckties being something that's not traditionally worn um, prior to many of the students that especially in the 1800s going to the schools probably never worn in their whole lives until attending. So I wanted to show something of them learning how to tie a tie or trying to figure it out seemingly conflicted in even in this instance, in this very small this small portrait here. So I just felt like it just kind of told a little bit about um, this with such a simple gesture.
Yeah, definitely. And even the facial expressions and how you rendered it and how you talked about how this came from you, more of like the thought process and that kind of energy and internal monologue rather than a photo, but you still definitely get that. It's like I'm adapting to this culture that's not my own. And I definitely think you got that across with this photo. Do you want to go to the next slide? And then Path to the Lake. Yeah, this was very impressive on me too. Was there a certain point that also when we were talking about fixing his tie and then also going to this one, was there a certain point that you like decided not to use photographs all the time? I know maybe you still do as reference material, but was there like a specific point that made you want to do it, or did you just have like a feeling like I want to paint the fixing his tie painting, or was there something specific, or was it more just like I guess organic energy that made you go into that?
Yeah, it kind of just happened, but at the same
Hmm.
time, I knew I wanted to go that route. And I'm telling myself, I was telling others, I was like,
Hmm.
I want to do this, but it's always been a little bit like of a fear, being like,
Hmm.
uh, how to get away from just relying on a source material, something
Hmm.
that gives you all the information and you can just run with it. Trying to bring more of your imagination. I've always envied people that are like animators and people that just create these characters out of nowhere.
Hmm.
and and so I started doing that a little bit, and some of these paintings tended to be a little bit more choppy, a little bit more loose. I would say some in some sense a little bit more freer in the way way I enforce technique in these works.
Hmm.
Definitely in the case for this one and the last one. Um, I I I wanted to see where I could go and just kind of like really change the perspective based on how I saw it fit for painting. And definitely with this one, even though I did pull those two girls from a scene that
Hmm.
was a crowd and they were just
Hmm.
sitting there with a crowd of other young girls, but I just isolated them, placed them in a different landscape. That actually the landscape for this, no photo reference, anything. I just kind
Hmm.
of like actually painted them first with nothing around them, no trees, no
Hmm.
lake or anything, and um, it actually like just emerged organically, like you said. And once I got to this point, even though you can see a lot of areas still look like
Hmm.
unresolved, I liked leaving that kind of like I'd done previously in some of my paintings.
Hmm. And was there a reason, you talked about how it was a group photo or a crowd photo before. What was your thought process behind like wanting to change that to more of a nature landscape? Like, did you know you wanted to take them out of the crowd, or were like the different points in your thought process of like creating this work?
Yeah, I they were the only two figures that stood out in that
Hmm.
picture. I was like, who are like what are they looking at? They're both like
Hmm.
they got their heads tilted towards each other a little bit. Are they best friends? Are they, did they confide in one another?
Mhm.
Like that, and those are just some of the thoughts that I think when when I look through. I love old archives, and no matter what it is, whether it's boarding school photos or whether it's um, anything else from the past. I love to wonder like what people were thinking like at that time, and it's not just a nostalgia thing. It's just like I felt like the photography, especially black and white photography, is always just captured something, the essence of that person, and like I really wanted to run with the idea of these two girls being friends,
Mhm.
and they're just like almost dreamers in a way or something, and so like
Mhm.
I felt like them sitting off by themselves, kind of like enjoying
Yeah, and I
enjoying
like it too, yeah, because
their
it's almost
yeah.
reclaiming that photo too, like how we've talked about throughout all of your work, even like the individual portraits in the beginning that were from that group photo, or here it's, taking out of the crowd, but putting them back in nature. It's definitely really great how you've created these other narratives and like, who are they? And like definitely looking at these photographs and, what's their story? It's often, I think we've talked about that throughout this talk is who are they? What is their story? And creating that through painting too as your narrative tool. So thank you for that. There might be one more slide or a couple more. Yeah, and then left ajar. So now we're switching to more interior space. Did you want to talk about this one?
Sure, yeah, just
Hmm.
briefly.
Yeah, briefly.
This one was, yeah, this one was one that I think I used another film still
Hmm.
as like as a source, changed it around, changed the figure from it was like some I don't even know what film I was watching, but regardless, I wanted to film kind of like a Hitchcock kind of scene that was like somewhat suspenseful. And one thing I want to talk about this on here, is one thing
Hmm.
I've always been a little um, sensitive of is trying not to tell too much about the horror stories that are involved
Hmm.
in these schools. I've never felt like it was my place to do that, but I think this painting kind of hints at that possibly.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I've just never felt like it's not my place to do that. So many other people can, like give their own stories from their experiences of their families or whatever that have gone through it. And but I did want to kind of hint at like there's a little bit of underlying dread uh,
Hmm.
in a lot of these paintings, even though a lot of them aren't blatantly telling it. So, and I
Hmm.
wanted to kind of sort of approach that with this piece.
Yeah, you don't have to show it per se black and white, but yeah, it definitely gives that energy of it. And then I know we have quite a few more slides to their work. If we can just, because we are coming up on 15 minutes left and I want to leave time for questions if our viewers have them. Mike, would you mind just going through his rest of Marcus's slides a little bit? Just to show the rest of his work. And then while we're scrolling through these last few images, Marcus, do you have any other comments from your work or boarding schools that you'd want to share before
Yeah,
we go into Q&A?
sure.
Hmm.
I've always I've always felt like this is something that has this whole theme around approaching boarding school subject matter has always been something that I felt like I said, I'm an out, not really an outsider because it does pertain to my own identity as a Native person, but it's been something that I am looking at as a third person. It's not. I didn't go to a boarding school. Even in my community, we had Indian schools, but they were Indian schools that were established by the Native people in my community, and there were like a dozen or so back at around 1911 through 1915 from my community that had attended Carlisle, but it wasn't by force like many that were sent from reservations back in the, when it was first established. Um, so I've always tried to be very, sensitive on topics relating to this. And I just hope that I just hope that those that, you know, when they see it, they they can they can feel something that does that it is important to me, but also is something that I'm like still trying to learn about, and all the while while making these works, I'm still trying to figure out um, how I can really tell other story without you know uh, making it seem like I am placing it in a neatly packaged box or something. You know what I mean? So, uh, but it is something I might further investigate in my works. I do plan on with my new works, and I figure some people might ask about that. I do want to do some paintings that approach things that are very specific to my local area growing up in North Carolina, and the Native people, that what they've gone through, especially over the past 100 years or so.
Mhm.
So that's one of the new things that I'm really going for.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that new work too. I'm glad we could have you here too and speaking about your work. For our viewers and listeners for those who are at least on the Zoom portion, maybe not for the call in, we did supply a few links in the chat that have articles that are written about Marcus's work if you'd like to read about him further and his past exhibits too. We mentioned one of them throughout this talk called Other Youth. There's also another one called Reeducated, but please look Marcus up and support his work. I did want to mention too, since we have been talking about boarding schools as well, that there is a website and a coalition called the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. You can find more information at boardingschoolhealing.org. It just has a lot of resources into what we've talked about with its boarding schools, more information about them, but also self-help resources too. Whether, you or your families have been affected by these or you just have certain feelings about them too. There are resources there for you to help yourself, but also educate yourself and others about what the boarding schools have done here. So I just want to point that out. We have about 10 minutes left for questions, if anybody has them for Marcus or myself. And then Mike, if you have any remaining comments, let us know.
Yeah, so we do have a couple questions coming in. I want to allow a couple minutes as well for folks to chime in through the chat or the QA. One of the questions is, are the other youth in quotes meant to be young natives or just young youth in general? And I believe this is a reference to your exhibition title, Other Youth.
Yeah, I think it was to represent young. Uh, I think kind of like I mentioned before, youth that were considered. I, I don't know. I've always referred it as to the word "other" being less than the majority, or a someone who's not of the majority. Someone that's not of the majority, or someone who's oppressed, and the youth that are from that group of people, whether it's indigenous people or Black communities or anyone else around that.
Thank you. Another question we received was, out of curiosity, would you ever make work about the survivors of boarding schools, uh, like after their experience of boarding school, or is it mainly about the boarding school history and those part of that history?
I would love to do that. I've just never known what direction to go about doing that. It has always been about the history, and for most part, that's all of that kind of surrounded myself with when making this work is a lot of the old archive photographs, and like I'm kind of stuck in that narrative, that mindset the whole time making them. But I would love to go stretch it a little bit further. I think that would be very important if I continue to do so. That's something I would like to do.
Thank you. A couple more. We still have time for maybe two more after this. Um, one of our guests, again, out of curiosity, asked if you had ever visited the Heard Museum.
Unfortunately, no. Yeah, I spent quite a few years in Santa Fe, but didn't make it to Phoenix. So one of these days, I'm gonna make it out there.
Yeah, seems fitting now that you have to come and visit.
That's right.
Another comment posted in the chat. Your first set of paintings of individual Chiricahua Apache students, I'll go quick to that really quick because we didn't get a whole lot of chances to see it. The students remind me of the initial video screen of the exhibit at the Herd, which captures the individual students and their individual experiences, and left a quote for us, part of the exhibition, I would assume. There is no one story, and that was from Cianina Lomawaima. I had a question for you, if that's okay, Marcus.
Yeah.
I guess it's one of those that kind of I don't know if you intended this, but everyone sees art and sees messages within the art. But for this one, I really love how you included that you left uh, the environment surroundings unresolved, and how you mentioned that you did take these girls and put them into a different surroundings. Was there any intention to make that to where this is more of like a dreamscape, like a longing for this imagery, apart from the original photo that they might have been surrounded by, whoever it is that they were surrounded by?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the things that definitely influenced that particular work, specifically Path to the Lake. I felt like a lot of that, going back to stories of students trying to get away, trying to leave. Maybe this was maybe this was a reflection of their home, like away from the schools, not just a pocket of land that's off to the side of this school campus. So that's definitely something that I thought about while making some of these works. Sure.
And two more questions and one comment in the chat, and then I was going to leave us with just the last remarks. It's been a popular Q&A session. That's awesome. I'll go to an anonymous contributor. Since your paintings are from black and white images, are the colors you use for your clothing historically accurate?
Um, they could be. They
Mhm.
could be. I don't. I usually just squeeze some paint out onto the palette and just run with it and see if it works for me. I'm not a color whiz or colorist or whatever you call it. So like, yeah, there some of these might be a little desaturated from what the original color palettes were, but I just kind of like go with the flow and work with the images. Let the images dictate like what's going to happen.
And then one of the last questions from Amanda is, as a film lover, do you feel you'd ever like to paint poster art for film?
I I definitely would for sure. I would be into that.
And if that's all the questions we have for today, I just wanted to leave us off with some comments in the chat and then my last comments. But uh, Joanne Smith let us know that Janet Cantley was the curator for the Away from Home exhibition at the Heard Museum. And we heard from Janet when she provided us the quote of "There is no one story." Karen let us know that your titles tie in well with your works, provoking deep thought into the horrible assimilation process. And then Janet, oh, we had Janet chime in again. We had a team of people working on the exhibit, including Cianina Lomawaima. So thank you to everyone who stuck with us for the full hour. Marcus was a very special guest for us, especially in preparation for the September month. I'll go ahead and turn my video on again. So we had Marcus here as our virtual artist, which is a complete honor and a wonderful, exciting time. I learned a lot from your paintings. I'm excited to go back in there and look at the details from some of your collection. But in preparation for September, we have Orange Shirt Day, as Liv mentioned, on September 30th. That is a Monday, and we do have a very special event to announce. Please check back on our event page for that announcement. As well as coming up next Friday is September 1st Friday, and that programming will be a special engagement where First Friday is usually exciting, energetic, trying to bring all folks locally to come in and check out the museum. For this September's First Friday, we will dedicate the programming to the Away from Home exhibition. We want to invite you to visit Away from Home for the first time or returning time, as well as participate in some of the programming that is set up to create a nurturing space around the experience. We'll have a guest of ours running a station for smudging and to learn what smudging is in case we have some folks who are unfamiliar. We'll have Munti Sinkwa here providing us with song and drum, as well as Sonia Brooks guiding us through a presentation on approaches to healing trauma, and a really exciting event that will have part of First Friday is Desert Bloom Tattoo Studio. We'll be providing flash tattoos throughout the whole day in commemoration of this day on September 30th, and kind of framing it around tattooing as medicine and reclamation. So if you're interested and you're here locally, please come by and visit us and participate with us for that event. But again, thank you so much for everyone to devoting their lunch with us in this conversation. Thank you to Olivia and thank you to Marcus.
Thank you for joining us, Marcus.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Y'all.